Hi everyone, my name is Rishika Porandla. I am the director of Spacetime Archives, and I am here with Mara Johnson-Groh. She is a NASA scientific author and a journalist, and we are going to be having an interview today. A quick background about her: she has a bachelor's in physics and a master's in astronomy. She's an award-winning scientific author and photographer, and she depicts everything on Earth and even things beyond the sun, as she puts it on her website. She freelances for magazines and online sites, and she's also a scientific writer for NASA, and her work has earned numerous accolades. And I'll let her get into her personal presentation.
Great. Thanks for that background. Um, I will just share this screen. Okay. Um, so I'll just give a brief background here. Um, as you said, I have a background in science. So I started out studying physics, and went on to study astronomy in graduate school, because I've always just loved astronomy and sort of those big picture questions. But then when I was working on my master's, I really loved the process of uh, being an astronomer. And at the time, I was finding new exoplanets and galaxies, and I really loved that. But I didn't love all the day-to-day work behind that. So I started thinking more about other avenues. And while I was doing that, I started writing for this website called Astrobytes. This is a website run entirely by graduate students, where they take new papers in astronomy and write them summaries about them for an undergraduate audience. And I really liked that. So I thought, why not become a science writer? So when I finished with my master's, I got a job at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, um, which has a huge campus with tons of scientists and engineers. But specifically, I work with the Heliophysics Division. Um, and heliophysics, it's essentially the study of the sun and everything the sun's light touches. So that's from flares on the sun to the auroras the sun triggers on Earth, to the very extent of the sun's influence past the planets. So the majority of my work is writing about new discoveries. So typically what that looks like is one of our scientists will make a new discovery, which they'll publish in a scientific journal. And I'll take that and write about it in a way that hopefully anyone can understand. We're really trying to write for a high school level audience. Um, so this work, we write articles, and then of course we're also putting that on social media, and writing posts there as well. And in addition to that work, I work with an amazing team who make all kinds of scientific visualizations, such as this one that shows how a particle moves through a very particular type of magnetic field in space. Um, and I also work with graphic designers who make these incredible posters and things that show stuff in ways that's hard to describe in words alone. I also work with a bunch of video producers who make wonderful content and videos for us, including this a new 6-part documentary series that is coming out at the end of this month. And for this series, actually, my coworker and I, we went to Australia last year to document the launch of 2 sounding rockets, which are these sort of small rockets that just take instruments, no humans, into space for a brief flight. And we've created this a whole really fun documentary series about that with them. So sometimes my job as a science writer entails like a bit more than just writing. In addition to that, I do a little bit of freelance science writing. So this is for different publications and magazines, both online and print. And this is a fun way for me to write about things that don't have to do with the sun sometimes, things a bit closer to Earth often. So with that, just jump into questions. That sounds good.
Yes, of course. Just from that presentation, I know I can speak for all aspiring scientists and journalists when I say your work is incredibly inspiring, and the amount of diversity that you have with the media that you use is also like just incredibly cool. And a lot of other people found you inspiring as well, and they submitted several questions, and I chose the top 15, which we will go through briefly now. So our first person asked, it's apparent that you have a passion for both writing and photography. Break down those interests for me. Do they coexist, or do you find yourself prioritizing one more than the other?
Yeah, so they definitely coexist quite nicely, actually. So I am a science writer, and that's sort of the basis of my job. But I've always loved photography, and it's always been a hobby. And now it's great that I can sort of use it in my job from time to time. So when I'm doing reporting from the field, I can take photos that sort of add to the story that I'm writing and help people really visualize the place. And so I love being able to combine those two things.
Is it always welcomed? Like if you're hired for a writing job, is it always welcome for you to accompany your photography with that? Because it's probably something that you prefer as well.
Yeah, yeah, I prefer it, and definitely the editors and publications love to have that as well. And sometimes that can lead to additional other things as well. So it's great to be able to offer that.
Our second person asked, as a photographer, you would have seen a lot of picturesque places. Which is your favorite that you have captured, and do you remember your experience taking pictures of it?
Yeah, so I have done a lot of traveling. I'm very privileged in that way. But I think one of my favorite photos is actually one I just took sort of almost in my backyard. I just went for a hike one day in the forest, and it was just beautiful foggy morning, and the light just came through just right. And I snapped a photo, and I think that's one of my favorites, just close to home.
I know everyone's familiar with the saying, a picture like stands for 1,000 words, or a picture means 1,000 words. You have a unique perspective on that because you write pictures and or you write words and you take pictures. So does that saying like, do you think it's correct? Like a picture does mean 1,000 words?
Yeah, I think it really does. I think there are things that you can caption words that you can't always capture in photos, but there are definitely things that photos really help bring a lot that you would need a lot more words for.
A third person asked, I noticed that both of your degrees are science-based. How did you get into writing from there?
Yeah, so I think I've always liked writing. And my undergraduate degree, I went to a liberal arts college. So there was kind of a lot of focus there on writing. Like there were a lot of classes that we take that like had to have a writing component in them, even our science classes. So I think that really gave me a good background in writing and how to become a good writer. But it's definitely been sort of a learning journey along the way. Now that I'm fully a writer, I'm still learning how to be a better writer.
You said that it was college that kind of immersed you into scientific journalism. In high school, or maybe when you were a child or younger, did you have any interest in writing, or was it something that came later on?
Yeah, definitely. I think I like wrote a few like little novels or stuff when I was in high school and growing up, and I always like loved reading science journalism as well, even though I didn't recognize it as that at the time. National Geographic articles and stuff like that. So.
Our fourth question is, which feels the most rewarding or satisfying to you? Creating work for others, whether that be freelancing for magazines or writing for NASA, or writing for yourself?
I think I find writing for others more rewarding. One thing I like about my job is that I'm creating this product that anybody can access and anyone can learn from. It's not something that you have to go out and buy um, in that way.
Our fifth question is, what is the appeal of astrophysics to you? Talk to me about how you view the field of study and how you approach it in your work, because it's obviously very complex and it's hard to break down into layman's terms, like you said in your presentation.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I've always loved astrophysics. Like I said before, I love those sort of big questions and sort of understanding the way that our universe works. Um, and so now that I'm a science writer, I love that I get to talk to all kinds of different scientists and astronauts and Nobel laureates about their work, and sort of get to hear firsthand about new discoveries and stuff. So it's challenging, but it's a lot of fun to be able to take that and think, how can I make this so that anyone can understand it?
A quick follow-up question about that. You said you talked to Nobel laureates, you talked to extremely experienced professionals. Do you have a particular experience that was just like a wow moment for you? Like it's, oh my gosh, I'm meeting like a celebrity right now.
Um, I think the first time I talked to a Nobel laureate, I was very intimidated because, they're like celebrities essentially. Um, but in talking to them, they were just so helpful and willing to answer all of my very simple questions. So it's cool to like have that interaction and be like, these people really just love science, no matter what level you're coming from.
Our next question is, tell me about the five-part science documentary series that you mentioned on your website. And also my small follow-up question, I want to hear about your documentary that's releasing at the end of this month as well.
Yeah, so that's the same thing actually. So we just dropped the trailer for that, and I can send you a link to include if you like. Um, so yeah, so last summer, my colleague and I we went to Australia to sort of follow these sounding rockets as they were launching. And so the mission, they were trying to look at Alpha Centauri A and B, which are two of our closest stars to the sun. And they wanted to look at those stars in order to help figure out how do stars influence the planets around them in the context of looking for life. So we got to go along and did a bunch of videography for that to sort of answer that question and share that journey with everyone.
So, this was obviously a collaborative project. What was the specific role that you played, and how did you work with the people around you to create this product?
hmm So yeah, to start with, it was just one of my coworkers who's also a science writer, and we worked together in Australia to film the series and just sort of write the script. And the series is hosted by my colleague, so he's sort of on screen talking us through things while I was doing a lot of the videography. And when we came back from that trip, we've been working with an amazing team of video producers here to help us cut it all together and make it into this short documentary series.
This topic actually flows nicely into our next question, which is, was the transition into cinematography natural, since you're already familiar with cameras as a photographer, or was it a skill that you had to ease into?
Definitely both. Since I have a background in photography, I sort of already understood some of those basic elements of composition and how to use different settings on a camera. Um, but photography is entirely different than cinematography in some ways. So there's definitely like a lot of learning curve, especially at the beginning, to sort of figure things out and how things work in that context.
I don't know if you can say this now because the documentary isn't, or this part is not officially released, but do you have a favorite scene or a favorite moment that you filmed?
Yeah, there's a few actually. I won't give away any spoilers, but we made this series. We wanted it to be sort of humorous and lighthearted and fun. So there's a lot of sort of funny little scenes that we recorded on along the way that you'll see when it comes out.
I'm excited to watch it. Our eighth question is there anything about your job that gets redundant or tiring? Are there certain topics that you're less interested in covering than others?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been doing this job for about 7 years now, and there are definitely some topics that get a little tiring, and a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is fairly complex. Like we're talking about sort of small electrons and particles flying through space around Earth, and it's can be very abstract. And so sometimes um, some of that gets a little repetitive in some of what we're covering. But the advantage of that is I also understand it a lot better now than when I started, which makes it easier to write about every time. So it's a double-edged sword.
Definitely. I love to write. Like in Spacetime Archives, I blog a lot, and something that like I notice myself whenever I'm writing is I either am trying to constantly one up my previous writing, like trying to push myself to be better than I was like a week ago when I wrote my last piece. Is
Mhm.
there a similar thing for you where there's a standard that you hold yourself to and you constantly want to improve, or is it more relaxed now since you've been doing it for around 7 years?
I think some of both. Like there's some things that I write that I sort of like know how to write about, and I feel like I haven't perfected it, but I have a good way of doing it. But at the same time, I'm always trying to overall just become a better writer. So always trying to like think of new ways to do things and reading other people's work to see how they've approached different topics and stuff like that also helps.
Our next question is, were you discovered in any way? How did you gain a platform with your work? And I'll add a bit of context to this because I think how this question was intended to be phrased was, what was your path to success? How did you gain the like media platform that you have today where your work is noticed?
That's a good question. So I don't really have a personal platform because all of my work is sort of just published um, through different magazines or through NASA. Um, but I think um, it's sort of almost like a little mini snowball. Like the more I write, the more people see my work, and the more other editors see my work, which leads to more work, and it just kind of grows from there.
I have a question. Since scientific journalism is something that I've always seen, but I don't exactly know much about the process beyond what you've said in this interview, is it almost like in when there's movies or books, authors have one thing that like puts them in the media spotlight. It's one thing that might have been successful for them, and that leads to more opportunities. Did you have a piece like that where it got a lot of media attention and it led to you getting more opportunities?
I can't think of one thing in particular, but I do know some other science writers who have covered one topic, and that sort of led them to now sort of becoming the science writing expert on that topic. So now people will sort of come to them for that subject.
A lot of people want to work for NASA, especially students with passions for STEM. Was the job what you expected?
Yeah, I think it's been even better than I expected. I work with such an amazing team of people, and there are so many talented people at NASA in general, whether it's the scientists and engineers and administrators and all of the support teams. So it's a really wonderful environment to meet all kinds of new people and attend lectures and learn things that you would otherwise know nothing about. A lot of fun. And there are tons of internships too available for people from high school to graduate school.
Yeah, there's even people wouldn't expect it because when you think NASA internship, you just think like it's either rigorous physics or rigorous engineering or math. But there's actually writing internships. I was looking at one that's currently
Mhm.
available at Kennedy, and it's actually a scientific journalism internship where you're actually working with a Kennedy science writer. So if anyone is interested in that, that's definitely something to check out. I have a quick follow-up question about specifically your work in the heliophysics department. So, scientific journalists and scientific writers in NASA, do you guys work completely individually, or is there a lot of collaboration that occurs?
It's a bit of both. So there are a bunch of different divisions. So the Heliophysics Division I'm in, there's the Astrophysics Division and Earth Sciences. So usually the different divisions, we sort of like work as a team in each of the divisions. Um, so we don't always like work with different institute or different divisions, but we'll sort of collaborate and say, hey, I have this thing coming up if you want to help promote it. But then within our division, within heliophysics, we work really closely together, and I'm always working with our data visualizers and graphic designers to help complement the writing that I'm doing.
How do you balance your time commitment with your employment at NASA and your other freelance work, and also your like creative activities like your documentary series? How do you balance all of those with your time?
Um, yeah, it's a lot of sort of prioritizing what needs to get done, and I think that's true of a lot of writing too, is so you're sort of juggling a bunch of things at once, and trying to just be organized with stuff really helps with that.
So for this next question, I think you already answered parts of this question in previous discussions, but as a student journalist with a massive interest in all things related to astrophysics, how do you balance these two interests of science and writing in your job?
Like advice for people who wanting to get into science journalism? Is that?
I think they mean like how do you make sure that you have both a scientific and a creative aspect in what you're creating? Like there's no like imbalance between those.
Mhm. Well, so all the writing is very focused with science at the center. Like when I'm writing about a new scientific discovery, for example. And so that's really sort of the motivating thing that I'm trying to describe. And then the creative aspect sort of comes on top of that. And that sort of helps make it more accessible, whether it's through metaphors or just creative language to help people understand. So at the heart of it, like the most important thing is conveying the science and making sure that that's accurate. And then second to that is sort of making it fun to read for people.
A quick follow-up question for me about that. Is scientific journalism something that you want to stay in, like the field you want to stay in for the rest of your career? Or do you have like little fledgling interests elsewhere, like in other types of writing?
Yeah, I think staying in science writing, I really love that I'm always getting to learn new things. I think that's really fun, and um, it's I just sort of like love always like getting to learn new things, and that makes it sort of new every day too. It's not like I'm just writing the same thing all of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Our next student wanted to ask, how in depth do you have to understand the scientific concepts behind what you write about? And is it something I should study more in my undergrad?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I would say I have more of a higher level understanding. It's not like super in depth. Um, and that's because I get to when I get a new paper or something from a scientist that I'm going to write about, I go through and I read it and I try to get a basic understanding of it. But then I write down a whole bunch of questions that I have and things I don't understand. And then I get to talk to the scientists and maybe other scientists as well. And they really help me understand it enough so that I can write about it for the public. So perhaps more important than um, becoming an expert in absolutely every aspect of science, which isn't even possible. Um, it's better to sort of have a basic understanding of how science works and how to read a scientific journal, which is a huge skill in itself, as well as how to just like ask questions to make sure you understand things. So I think the biggest skill is just like learning how to ask questions. Um, in undergrad, like it if you know you want to write about something specific, then it's good to like take classes in that or just take like 100 level classes in everything if you want to study everything. But I would say it is more helpful to come to science writing from a science background than a writing background because it's easier to sort of learn writing along the way than it is to like learn a whole field of science. So I do know people who have gone both ways with that.
Thank you for that. That was a really great in-depth explanation. Our next question asks, what does a typical day look like for you?
Typically, I like to start working pretty early in the morning. I find that I just sort of like write and focus best in the morning. I'm more of a morning person, I guess. And so some days I'll be sort of doing research and conducting interviews or maybe having meetings with my teammates. And other days I'll set aside like chunks of time to really just like focus on writing because I need more space in my schedule to be able to do that more the writing side of things. And then in the afternoon I like to sort of get all my work done early and then I can go be outside and do other hobbies later in the day.
Sounds like you have, just from what I've been hearing, sounds like you have a great balance between like your recreational writing, your like time for yourself, time like employed with NASA and writing for them. So it seems like your career is like amazing. Um, so our next question is, how do you get started on your assignments and what does each assignment demand from you?
Yeah, so typically, for when this work at NASA, like our scientists will come to us and say, I have this new discovery that I think will be important to share with the public. And so then um, I'll take that paper or what they might have to read through it and try to get that understanding. And then that's where then I'll ask a bunch of questions before sitting down to like actually write the news story or whatever it is. And then, like I mentioned before, how science is sort of the most important part. I'll make sure that all of that text and stuff, it gets fact checked by the scientists to make sure that it's all accurate and there's nothing that I got wrong along the way, which can happen because I am not an expert in all science.
In the process of like scientists come to you with their like novel discoveries, have you ever denied a writing request?
Yeah, well, sometimes we're just too busy. Like there are some things that we just like don't have the time to cover. We're a limited team size, so unfortunately, not every new scientific discovery is we're able to cover.
And our final question, which is actually a great note to end off on, are there any resources that you'd recommend for aspiring science journalists to look into for more guidance?
Yeah, there's a great website. It's called the Open Notebook, and they have all kinds of resources, whether you're looking to like get into science writing or you have specific areas that you want to learn about more, like how to conduct a good interview or technical aspects of writing. So as a really great one for people interested in science writing.
Thank you so much, Mara. I know it was like
Yeah.
so enlightening just to hear what you have to say about science journalism. When I found you through one of NASA's articles, actually. I was like, wow, this is like so incredibly written. And I scrolled down and I was like, who wrote it? And then I found your personal website and then I contacted you through there. And I know everyone that asked a question today is going to be incredibly excited to watch back this recording and see what you had to say. For everyone watching, I wanted to give a quick reminder that Mora's documentary is releasing at the end of this month. And you said that the trailer was is out currently?
Yeah, yeah, you can find it on YouTube and I'll send you a link
Okay,
for that as well.
great. Thank you so much, Mara, for this interview.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks for all these questions. They're all great.